Hi, and welcome to another episode of Family Conversations. My name is Jimmie Manning. I am chair and professor in the Department of Communication Studies at the University of Nevada, Reno. And as you know, on Family Conversations, we have conversations with some of the top scholars in family communication. And today we certainly have two top scholars. I have to tell you, I am so impressed with all they have done. Both of today's guests are tenure track faculty members, but they have already published more than a lot of professors publish in the entirety of their careers. We have Dr. Kristina Scharp, who is an assistant professor in the Department of Communication at the University of Washington, and her research primarily looks at difficult family transitions and the ways family cope with major disruptions in their lives. And then we also have Dr. Elizabeth Dorrance Hall, who's an assistant professor in the communication department at Michigan State University. And her work looks at interpersonal and family communication theories as they're extended towards exploring how family communication and support are associated with young adults' academic, relational, and psychological well-being. And then the two of these individuals have research programs that really fit together well, and there's a little bit of history there that we might get into today, but they also are involved with the Family Communication and Relationships Lab, which we will also talk about today. So welcome, Kristina. Welcome, Elizabeth. I'm so glad to have you on Family Conversations. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for coming. So I'm going to jump right in. The first thing I'm going to ask about is what I like to ask all the guests, or I like to ask family communication scholars in general. How did you come to family communication studies? That is, what was it that got you here to this space where you're doing all this research and all this teaching about family communication?
Yeah, it's a great question. I started my academic journey studying general communication, organizational communication, and then interpersonal communication. And what I really like about family communication is it's so immediately relevant. Family is really important to me. I'm surrounded by family a lot of the time. And also, most people are either chosen kin or their family of origin. And so I saw all the dynamics of communication theory and interpersonal communication playing out in family interactions, but there's a little something else going on there, right? This kind of deeper bond, something that allows us to get away with a little more than we might in like a friendship, or, deeper conversations than we might be able to have otherwise. So I found that really fascinating, that it's like interpersonal relationships kind of maximized.
So unlike Elizabeth, I actually didn't start my journey in communication studies. I was a international studies and German double major, but I took a general education class called Questions in Communication, and we read this book called Relating Dialogues and Dialectics by Baxter and Montgomery, and I fell in love with the concepts and the processes of dialectics and meaning making. And so when I got to grad school, I went to Dr. Baxter's program where she was firmly situated in family communication. So a lot of the processes that I was really excited about, I first learned about in a family communication context, and it really kind of inspired me to continue looking at those processes in a family communication context, especially with regard to different family forms and what's going on, why some of those forms are stigmatized and celebrated in a variety of different ways.
Yeah, and you studied with Leslie Baxter, who has done a lot for family communication. Dr. Dorrance Hall, you've studied with Steve Wilson, who does a lot on family communication. So I love that both of you have kind of created your own world, your own research programs in family communication, and yet you're kind of connected to that family history that we often see in the field. Now, you two collectively study forms of family distancing. And so each of you have different approaches to that, or kind of your own angles. Can you tell us a little bit about this work?
Sure. I would say both of us, when we think about family and relational distancing, are thinking about the ways that people either pull away from their families, are pushed out of their families, decide to part mutually, have some sort of third-party interference, such as the case of like foster care or incarceration. And within that, I particularly am interested in family estrangement and parent-child alienation. So where family estrangement is when a family member voluntarily and intentionally distances themselves because of an often ongoing perceived negative relationship. Parental alienation occurs after two parents divorce and one parent turns their child against the other parent. Mm-hmm. So while estrangement and alienation are somewhat similar, they are often differentiated for based on the reasons why the child wants distance. In the case of estrangement, it's usually abuse or neglect related, and in alienation, it's typically because one parent has manipulated the child in some sort of way.
Yeah, and I study family member marginalization primarily. So in this case, family members might be pushed out or they might pull away from the rest of the family. And this is better known as the black sheep of the family, which is a process that I saw going on all around me. Most people, when I tell them this is what I study, they have a story for me. It's really the process of families communicating difference, disapproval, and exclusion to typically one member over a long period of time. So I study how and why this happens, as well as what consequences there are for the individual and for the family at large. And because this is a pretty common phenomenon that occurs, there are lots of other types of family distancing that we are starting to study and hope to study in the future and want to kind of show other people that they're already studying. So things like going off to college and being away from the family, that is technically family distance, even though it's very normative and seen as a good thing. There's certainly still challenges that come along with that. So a lot of different and many kind of future areas to look at within family distancing.
So I have a question. I study favoritism, and one of the things that we've noticed with Dr. Andrea South at Northern Kentucky University, one of the things we noticed is that different periods of life, you might have a different favorite going on in the family. And we noticed it was more than just parents, right? So parents get the blame for favoritism. Is the black sheep phenomenon that way, or is distancing in general that way, where you might have one member that gets more distance at a certain time in life, or one child who was the black sheep for a bit, and then maybe somebody else takes over that role?
Yeah, absolutely. That can happen. Some people will report, having felt that way their entire lives. Other people it will be due to some kind of life choice or something that happens in their life that suddenly their parents kind of do that disapproval and exclusion. So it really depends. But yeah, and there can be multiple black sheep in a family, which can kind of create a nice kind of allyship between them too, which is really cool.
Yeah, now, and Kristina, I wanted to follow up on your research program. So you talk about estrangement. And I know that we know the answers as family communication scholars, but for those who are watching who might not, why would estrangement fall in communication studies? Because people say, well, there's no communication there. How is this a communication phenomenon?
Sure. So estrangement, just like many of the distancing topics that we discuss, are processes. So it takes communication usually as the catalyst for why we want distance. Takes communication as we distance ourselves, but also a lot of communication to maintain distance, especially when it comes to families, because the culture expects us to be in a family relationship. So it takes a lot of discussing, explaining to other people, like why we aren't going home for Christmas or why we don't celebrate Mother's Day. So communication is thread throughout estrangement, but also this idea that estrangement is multifaceted. So it's not just a lack of communication. There's all different characteristics of estrangement where we might want distance in some places and not others. So maybe we want distance in quantity, like you alluded to, but we still live with that person. So there's physical proximity, or maybe it has to do with the emotions we feel, or even the quality of the communication we have with a person.
All right, so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, both of you, because I didn't tell you that I was going to ask this kind of question in advance, but I'm just wondering, what would be one thing from each of your research programs in this area that you think people should hear or know related to the research that you do? Because, one of the things I love about family communication is it is so practical. Like there is so much we can take about and apply to our own life. So what has your research done in that regard?
Yeah, I'll jump in first, so that's okay. I would just say one of the most interesting studies I did was about the resilience strategies that black sheep or marginalized family members kind of utilize to kind of cope with their status. And I would just say, people who are experiencing disapproval from their family, from this group that's, at least in terms of our norms and our culture, are supposed to be unconditionally there for you, right? It's a really painful experience. And so I think Kristina would echo this as well. Asking people can be tough, like, why aren't you seeing your families for Christmas, right? Or why don't you, have a good relationship with your mom? So kind of treading lightly on that. But if you are close to someone who is experiencing that kind of family situation, being there for them, right? Because like I mentioned, if there's two people in the family that kind of are both experiencing this, they talk about siblings being really important allies, whether or not they're also a black sheep. So there are really important people in their lives that can help and kind of lessen the pain associated with this family position. And so if you can be that person for someone, or if you are experiencing that, make sure to reach out to your support network in all the ways that you can, because that can make a big difference.
I would say that I definitely agree with what Elizabeth said, but I like to think of the practical part about my research is disrupting what it means to be a family. So a lot of our research points to the ways that people are distancing themselves from relationships that people think that you have to be in because of the structural definitions of family that privilege biology and law. And I think that our research really highlights the importance of the things we do as family and the affection and the communication we have with the people important to us, that really highlights that, like, you in a relationship that is unhealthy and abusive, like, despite definitions that tie families to blood, there's other types of definitions around family that privilege care and affection, and when you can hold on to those, you can see possibilities to exit relationships that aren't healthy and can be really harmful. And so to think largely that family distancing can be a healthy solution to some really unhealthy environments, and to the possibilities of thinking about family differently allow us to maybe make some important changes to our lives.
Well, the research you two are doing is so important, and it's thrusting family communication in important new directions. So I thank you for that. But in addition to the wonderful research that you're doing, you two also run a family communication and relationships lab. Can you tell us a little more about that and what that involves or entails?
Sure. So the Family Communication and Relationships Lab is co-directed by Kristina and I, kind of at Michigan State University and also at the University of Washington. And it really houses a collection of researchers and students that are really invested in understanding the complex dynamics of family communication, right, in a variety of contexts. And so it allows us a platform to share our work, to get the word out, a place where people can go if they're looking for information. We all house that there on our website, which is www.familycomlab.com. So check it out. And we collaborate with researchers around the globe. Sorry,
the link will be in the comments as well. So there we go.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. And so we really try to collect our work there, right? And also have a place where people can collaborate and get together and find other people that can be of help for their research and for what they're looking for. So oftentimes, like media, will go there to find the work they're looking for.
All right. And then if someone wanted to start a lab of their own, so you've brought together this collection of scholars, looks like you have institutional support. What would someone do to get this kind of thing started? How could they get a lab in place or get a lab going? It seems almost like a daunting task. Hard?
I think that we definitely took different steps at different times. We met with someone who ran a really successful center before we started our lab to get advice. And I think some of the best advice we got is to really make it a community effort. So we have an advisory board of family communication scholars who we turn to for advice. We feature fellows, you're one of them, who we like to highlight their work and to celebrate. So it's really not just us. Like, we are the interpersonal family communication scholars it's really relational. And so it's less daunting when you have a team, for sure. And that was definitely some of the first things we did infrastructurally is get a team around us who could help contribute to what our lab is becoming. And certainly I have to say that Elizabeth has done a fabulous job. She's much more tech savvy than I am in creating a social media presence to help celebrate the work that's coming out of our lab, but just other people in family communication and the great contributions that they're making.
Yeah, I would say just real quick to add on, if you can find someone that you work really well with. So Kristina and I really have different strengths, which makes us a great team, and we're able to get a lot done because we are both excited about all the exciting ideas we come up with and making them happen. So that's an important element too. But don't be afraid to do it. It's definitely something that is achievable.
Yeah, I don't know when you two sleep. I just don't. You do so much, and you talked about the social media aspect. The website is beautiful, and you have like a professional layout and look and that kind of thing. And so I encourage people to check it out. As I mentioned earlier, that link is available with this video. But we are running out of time, so I am going to get into our final question for this episode, and it's the final question I ask everyone. What is something good or exciting or interesting or essential that you believe people should read from family communication studies? And so this can be a book, an article, whatever. It can be a classic. It can be brand new. But I just want to give a chance to hear, what do you think we should read, or what have you been reading that you think that those watching this show would find interesting?
I went with a classic, if we can call 2002 a classic, Corner and Fitzpatrick 2002, which is the Family Communication Patterns Theory article. I read it over and over and over again, and was one of the first pieces I read in my family communication class in grad school, and really you got deep in it. But I would add the Schroe et al. Meta-analysis about family communication patterns, and then also Horstman et al. 2018, which is kind of re-looking at conformity orientation, because I think these three pieces together really show you how a theory evolves over time, how scholars can contribute to extending a theory, and how things can be adapted as we change and grow with our ideas. So I think the package of three is what I'd say.
Yeah, and it's amazing how students catch on to, at first they're a little daunted by maybe all the parts, but once they catch on, they start to use that language and start to understand how families communicate. So I love the utility of the theory as well. Kristina?
So probably on the other end of the spectrum, I chose something a little bit harder for students to understand. It is Baxter's 2011 Voicing Relationships book. Probably not a surprise that that is my pick, but what I really like about it is that it really centers communication and language in the theory, and also acknowledges the way that our world is subject to power, as well as gets at disrupting the ideologies that stigmatize and marginalize different family members in different family forms. It's really one of the first kind of critically oriented theories in family comm studies that's widely read and widely used, and it really asks people to think about communication as and language and discourse as an actor that has a lot of power in our world.
Yeah, and what I love about both of your choices, those seem to be like what I call gotcha pieces, where when people find family communication patterns theory, or when they find relational dialectics theory, they're like, oh my gosh, maybe I am a family communication person, because there is something about that theory that speaks to me. So I love that those two pieces kind of, or those two, I would say even theories that you're kind of spotlighting here, really align in that way. All right, so we are at time. Is there anything else you feel like you wanted to share today, or anything you want to get out there that you haven't been able to during today's show?
Family communication is such a young field. There's so many opportunities for people to the knowledge in our area. So it's just, I think, an exciting time, and there's lots of opportunities to do important work.
Yeah, for sure.
Couldn't agree more. That was great. Thank you for having us, Jimmie.
Yeah, thank you, Jimmie.
Well, thank you both. And That's it for Family Conversations today, the show where the production values are low, but as today's guest show, the brilliance is high. Thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you all in another episode. Bye.